50 years of dedicated struggle as a human rights activist. And actually, Hoover misguided in his statements and claimed that Muhammad was one of the most dangerous men in America because of his capacity to organize effectively African Americans and the development of RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement. And we'd like to later find out and talk in detail on RAM in Detroit. It started out in the 1960s, of course, out of Central, what later became Central State University, with Don Freeman, and actually influenced the whole liberation movement in the sense of connecting the South through SNCC and FIS to the North when he founded the Black Panther Party in New York. And in a very effective way, John Bracey, who I first met as a student at Amherst College and has built one of the most successful graduate programs in the history of the United States, and John still sits as chair of that very esteemed program. One of the first books that I encountered was called Black Nationalism. Well, the first time I saw General Baker's in writing in print, it had a profound impact on me and my development. And I would certainly ask all of you to visit John's link. We do have that on the website with a number of books and his material. There's a recent DVD called How Racism Harms White Americans. How Racism Harms White Americans. A lecture by John Bracey that's put out by the Media Education Foundation out of UMass area. And it's a brilliant piece. Actually, there's a somewhat of edition of this online in a previous lecture he gave at a college. But this is formatted to embrace some of the more recent developments around racism and Obama, for example. So with that being said, our format today is we're going to show a part of Cointelpro. Not the entire piece, but we're going to start with the attack on Black America by Cointelpro. And then we are going to show an interview with Ahmad as a foundation piece for a more detailed discussion. But we'd like to open up the floor. Like, first of all, if you could give a round of applause for our guests. We're going to have a brief discussion or introduction by both panelists. We'll take a break and show the film. I'll come back and have a question and answer session. This session is being videotaped, so that any questions you have, we'd like you to make those questions from the mic so that we can hear and document this session clearly. This is an historic event, and I appreciate your attendance. Thank you. Brother Muhammad.
The Revolutionary Action Movement, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The Revolutionary Action Movement came into existence because of administrative repression on the student body of Central State. Don Freeman didn't have anything to do with it. Actually, I was just a part of it.
Can you put the mic up?
Yes. What happened was in September of 1961, I met Don Freeman in Madison, Wisconsin in about August, some late July, August, at the National Student Association Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. I had just joined SDS. And Freeman was, you know, what folks call an old head. You know, he was 2 or 3 years older than me, and seemed like he knew what he was talking about. So I went back to school, and in September we pulled about 10 folks together. We had been talking, and we had been in demonstrations, by the way, up to that point. I had been a member of CORE and had been a recruiter for the Freedom Rides. And at that point, there were so many African American students going. My job was to recruit white students at Central State. And if you see Negroes with guns, there's a gentleman getting off the bus, coming into Monroe as one of the Freedom Riders, real short, stocky, and he was one of my recruits. I missed the bus, and so I ended up at Madison, Wisconsin. And in August, if I'm not mistaken, it was August 21st, that night we got word that Robert had fled from Monroe. And we were hoping that he would get, out, and he got out, And so when I went back to school in September, we formed a group called Challenge, which was a chapter of SDS. It was all African American, just because the school was all African American, mainly, So I mean, we weren't restricted, and so some of us would, head up CORE, some of us would head up this group, some went into, we recruited from sororities, fraternities, and so it started out as a group to raise the student body's consciousness by running political parties. All right? And you could talk, you have people talk and stuff. And we also, I had been made the NSA coordinator, so we could get money from student body to go into the South at SNCC conferences and things like this. And demonstrations had been going on in Xenia. When I went to school in 1960, I go in town and it's a demonstration, so that's how I got involved. I had, protested in support of the sit-ins in Philadelphia, boycotting Woolworths, but by the time I get to campus, here we can't even go in a bowling alley, but on Wednesday night. I don't understand. So it was a demonstration, so you involved in that. And then the sisters, they couldn't, try on dresses, and so they tried to desegregate downtown Xenia. They brought out dogs and stuff, and the theater, movie theater, so it would just be a few of us brothers, a lot of us, the sisters, that was, and your white students, by the way, were very active, and some Africans. And so what Charles Wesley had done, which we didn't, at least I didn't realize until I was getting ready to leave Central, is that he had made Central a haven for radicals who have been kicked out of places all over the country and all over the world. All right, you know. So, you know, you get inklings of, you know, there would be African students who have been involved in the Mama, you know, and the, you know, African students from Senegal or somewhere who say, I am a communist, you know, so, you know, you had that kind of campus atmosphere, and it was, you know, I mean, very liberal. And so after a while you'd find out, well, if you take so-and-so's class, you know, I mean, you know, they're pretty progressive, you know. And so you know, one of my favorite as a freshman professors was Dr. Temple, who had been in India with Gandhi, you know. And so you had this mix, right? And then we had radical, African American radical professor, Dr. Jerome Jones, who, you know, mentored me, and they ended up killing him. But he was a protege of W.E.B. Du Bois. He's one of your early Ph.D.s from Harvard in political science. Well, with all this, you know, protests off campus and on campus, and the raising of consciousness, I'm from Philadelphia, so, you know, a lot of the guys I hang out with were from Philadelphia. And it was the Adderley brothers, you know, so James Adderley was in my class. John Adderley was a class ahead. He knew Tim Jenkins, right? And I met Tim. Tim Jenkins was the vice president for NSA. Tim Jenkins was beaten, left for dead in Macomb, Mississippi in 1961. You know, and it's a picture, you know, on the Snippet newsletter of Tim in the driver's seat, out conscious, you know. And I think Tom Hayden had been with him. Well, Adderley, you know, used to, you know, John used to, like, he sort of mentor me, you know. And so how I really got involved is one day, you know, he said, look, man, he said, there's a guy, you know, like, in the South that, you know, thinks like you. Why don't you know, read it? And he gave me a copy of the Crusader. It was a memorandum for Crusader, right? You know, so I subscribed to the Crusader. And so I'm, you know, in the process of organizing freedom rides, and, you know, so as things picked up, by the next year, the consciousness was there. You know, now we couldn't get to the groups, right? We couldn't get to the senior class. But by this time, John's a senior, right? And a fluke, off a fluke, you know. I'm asleep in the sophomore men's dormitory. And a guy comes and gets, you know, it's, I think a Friday night. He says, look, man, the freshman men are going to raid the sophomore women's diamond way. A panty raid. You know, right? You know, so he said, why don't you come out and talk to them? So yeah, they out there. I said, hey man, what are you about? Panty raid? You know, I mean, like, that's, we ain't doing that. What you want to have a panty raid for? And so I said, if you have grievances, I'll help you organize. Little did I know it was a spy. So, and they said, well, the food and this and that. I said, well, we'll get together and I'll show you how to organize. And so I go back to sleep. And about 2 or 3 in the morning, there's a pound on the door. So I figured it's one of these guys. I go to the door ready to swing, and it's this, Ohio State Patrol with what looked like a shotgun. So, I said, hey, don't shoot. So he says, come with me. There's 3 of us, right? And so it's Arthur Thomas's brother, George Thomas. And he used to think I was crazy. Turk was out, and he had broken arms. And so, and another brother from Jersey. So so this cop comes into the room, right? So he said, get dressed, y'all the only ones, we got everybody else, in the auditorium. So I said, look, what's going on? He said, McStarworth, the dean of students, said, get all of you. So, Richard and I getting our clothes on. So Turkaboo, we used to call him Turkaboo George, said, I ain't going on. Please, So the cop lowers what looks like a shotgun down to his head. Now, if it was this time, this was before, real repression, we was something, Richard and I said, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. And he's out of shit, man. And so the cop gets upset. He says, this is only a flare gun, man. He said, if you don't come with me, I'm in trouble. So George said, I ain't going nowhere. So Richard and I go in. So we're the last one in. McStarworth had arbitrarily called the Ohio State Patrol at 2 in the morning and asked to round up, I guess, about 1,000 men on campus. Right. The campus had about 2,000, maybe 2,000. Every man on campus was brought in to that auditorium. So, I've been sort of outspoken, I guess. So, the guy said, oh, yeah, here goes Maxwell. Sit down, and McStarworth is raging. I said, did he explain, why we were brought in? And they said, no. We later found out that in this panty raid, one of the ladies said that $9 was missing in her pocketbook after the raid. So he brings in the Ohio State Patrol and rounds us up. So it's, they're lining, the whole auditorium, with what looks like shotguns, you know. And so McStallworth said, is there anyone that has anything to say? And I guess that's when I walked my first last mile. He raised my hand. I said, oh, this is it. And so he knew I was the NSA coordinator in the student government, so he said, come on up. And he had a portable microphone, so he gave me the microphone. I didn't know what I was going to say. But I looked around, and I just said, this is not Nazi Germany. And you could hear Panama. You know, guys were just falling out in the field. So he snatched the microphone from me. I snatched it back. He snatched it back. And then he said, I'll see you tomorrow. So I thought I was going to get kicked out of school. But what had happened was he had made an arbitrary decision. And so I go to see him the next day. He's not in his office. And I find out from Dr. Jerome Jones and Dr. Tandy, they saved me because he had not called a faculty meeting or any of the administrators and announcements. Well, this, now, if you couldn't convince anybody before, you could convince them now, because everybody was enraged, right? All the girlfriends were enraged, everybody was enraged, you know. So John Adderley called the meeting, and all the sororities were there, all, you know, all the fraternities were there, and, you know, everybody, you know, who had some kind of organization was there. And so when I came into the meeting, Adderley sat me down next to him, and then we talked about taking over the campus. So, and in the process, we discussed, what are we trying to do? And first, you know, we came up, well, we're revolutionary, right? You know. And then we said, well, we're trying to bring an awareness, right? And so we're developing a movement. And then we said, no, we want more than awareness. We're talking about, you know, some revolutionary action. And so that's how RAM formed. Right? And some of us, you know, decided. And you know, I was constantly in correspondence with Freeman. Freeman was a school teacher, had graduated from Case Western Reserve. And so I was letting him know the developments. And then he would say, well, we have to, this is what RAM has to be like SNCC, but then like the Nation of Islam. It has to build a black workers' nationalist movement in the North. You know, has to have direct action like CORE and SNCC, but, you know, different. So his idea, you know, was a mesh. Right? So we talked, and so we had a collective, and so we said, well, what are we going to do with challenge? We said, well, we just, you know, go into RAM. And so one section stayed at Central and took over the student government for I don't know how many years. And then others went home, you know, or back to their home. I left school and came to Philadelphia, back to Philadelphia. Wanda Marshall, who was my girlfriend at the time, she was AK. and she had led a freshman women's movement about the cafeteria and other things. And so she transfers to Temple University. And so in Philly, that was the center of the NSA. We later found out in 1969 that NSA was funded by the CIA. We didn't know. Okay? And so who was in Philly was Miss Ella Baker and Marion Barry, who was then the interim chairman of Snippet. So I started, we worked, with, mobilizing for raising funds for Snippet. And, I'm going to stop at a minute. And so I joined a Black Marxist collective called Organization of Work. And Don would come through, and so I had him sit down with these guys, and he said, well, they're academic Marxists. And so I was working in the factory, and and trying to do some kind of organizing. So he said, you're going to have to, do something. So I said, what? And he said, you're going to have to build RAM here. So you got to rebuild RAM. And he, I used to take minutes, he would talk, and so I said, okay. And so I began to circulate, began to learn who was who in the movement in Philadelphia. So one day, I'm going to the civil rights desk, and it was a white guy at the civil rights desk who, took pride in just, making you feel this big that he knew everything in the movement. Other people wouldn't listen to him, they'd leave. And I said, oh, okay, what about, oh yeah. So I go in there one day, and he says, I guess you don't know who's in town. I said, no, who? He said, Mrs. Ethel Johnson. So I said, who's Mrs. Ethel Johnson? Co-worker Robert F. Williams. I said, oh yeah. I said, why don't you give me your phone number? And he did. And I called up, took one of our discussion papers to her. And this was maybe 2 weeks or a week and a half before Thanksgiving. Freeman came through and he said, look, you're going to have to start something. And I was hesitant. And he said, well, so I said, well, who's going to follow me? And of course, Rhonda and her girlfriend, we will. And so he leaves. I'm not convinced. So Thanksgiving, I went to White Plains, New York. And so I, asked Rhonda, I said, why don't you call Minister Malcolm? So she called my numbers, Temple number 7. And they said, well, he will be in Temple number 7's restaurant in the afternoon, late afternoon. And she thought it was fun. So we went down to Temple number 7. And Malcolm came in with Minister Benjamin, who became Minister Kareem. And he gave an analysis. Now, I've been taught some black history. I studied some black history and, politics. But he gave the analysis from ancient time to present time. And if you have ever watched Malcolm, but to have Malcolm on the other side of a table standing up, it was mind-blowing. And he apologized, his voice was hoarse, and then he said Benjamin could, teach us mathematics. And so I asked him before he left, should I join the Nation of Islam? And he said, no. He can do more from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad by working on the outside of the Nation of Islam. So when we came back to Philadelphia, I called Ethel and she said, come over. She said, did you write this? I said, yeah. She said, are you serious? I said, yeah. She said, well, I used to help Robert, and put out the crusade. And I'll show you how it's done. And if it wasn't for Ethel Johnson, it wouldn't have been around. Because she showed us how to organize. And we began by working with whoever you feel is progressive in the community. Because Mrs. Baker used to always say, there's always a movement. All right. So when you go into any community, you don't necessarily try to start something. You try to find out who is doing something progressive and begin to work with them and network. And that's how we're going. That was long.